Good evening. Tonight, shock and disbelief after a New York appeals court overturned the 2020 rape conviction of former movie mogul Harvey Weinstein. The reversal of the landmark case during the height of the Me Too era, marking the latest chapter in the saga of the infamous movie producer. Weinstein was one of the most notable in Hollywood, founding the film company Miramax and producing award-winning films and Broadway shows. But behind the scenes, he was hiding one of the darkest secrets in the industry. Let's take you back to where all this started, where Weinstein's empire started to crumble. In 2017, those secrets were made public. You may remember the New York Times and the New Yorker publishing this report detailing a series of accusations of sexual assaults and harassment of dozens of women spanning nearly 3 decades. Then, in May of 2018, Weinstein was indicted by a New York grand jury, accused of rape and sexual assault. And then 2 years later, his historic New York trial began, a moment many of Weinstein's accusers thought would never come.
The trial means so much to so many, but it will mean the most to the brave women testifying and to all of us silence breakers.
Then in February 2020, Harvey Weinstein is found guilty of third-degree rape. Weinstein left in shock, his mouth wide open as the verdict was read. And just a month later, he's sentenced to 23 years in his New York case, a monumental win for some of his accusers. A year later, Weinstein's defense filing that key appeal that we were talking about today, arguing some of the women who testified should have never been allowed on the stand. Shortly after, Weinstein was sentenced to 16 years in a separate case in California. And today, a New York appeals court handing down that victory for Weinstein, deciding he was not given a fair trial. The announcement sending shockwaves through the Me Too movement, which grew to prominence back in 2017 as a result of the Weinstein case. We're breaking down how all this happened, what it means for the fallen Hollywood mogul, and reaction from survivors. NBC's Kate Snow starts us off.
For the more than 100 accusers of Harvey Weinstein, it was a shock.
This today is an act of institutional betrayal.
In a 4-3 decision, the New York Court of Appeals finding Weinstein is entitled to a new trial. His spokesperson speaking to NBC's Chloe Malas.
What he did might have been insensitive, might have been unethical, but it wasn't a crime. And in order for them to bring it back, they're going to have to find witnesses to come forward with actual crimes.
Weinstein was charged with crimes in New York involving 3 women and convicted in 2020 of rape and sexual assault. But that trial also included testimony from 3 other women who made allegations that never led to charges. Today, the majority in the Court of Appeals concluding the trial court made egregious errors, erroneously admitting that testimony, calling it unnecessary.
The jury was able to look at that and probably infer that he was guilty in the past, so he must be guilty now.
And that's what this higher court said can't be allowed.
That's right.
The state court of appeals also said the trial court abused its discretion when it said Weinstein could be cross-examined about those other 3 women.
And even if he denied them, just the fact of being accused of them could allow the jury to infer his guilt based on prior behavior.
He then decided not to testify. One of those women was Dawn Dunning. Today, she said, "People have asked me if I regret having testified. Was this all for naught? And my answer is a resounding no." We spoke with other Weinstein accusers not involved in the trial.
All of the fear and the panic and the confusion from the original trauma comes back.
I'm deeply concerned. It's a setback for justice for survivors.
In a dissenting opinion, 3 justices wrote, "Men who serially sexually exploit their power over women will reap the benefit of today's decision."
We've already heard this refrain about Me Too has gone too far. And I think that there's going to be some people out there thinking, oh, good. So now we've redressed the balance. And I don't think Me Too ever went far enough.
For more on this stunning reversal of Weinstein's conviction and what it means for the Me Too movement, Kate Snow joins us live on set with our panel of legal experts tonight. NBC News legal analyst Angela Senadella and criminal defense attorney Sarah Azari, who's live for us in Los Angeles. Kate, I want to start with you. You've done so much reporting on the Me Too movement, and I know you've heard from some of the victims today. What are they telling you?
Yeah, well, as you might imagine, and you heard in the piece, they are stunned. They were not expecting this, I think. I think some of Weinstein's attorneys would tell you that they thought they had a really good argument on appeal. But the women who made all those accusations against him are certainly just, distressed by today's decision and feeling like, as you heard alluded to there from one of the women I talked to, they feel like this could be a real setback and a precedent for other cases. So, there's disappointment. I think at the same time, there's a thought of, can we do this all over again? If there is a retrial in New York, will those same women, the original 3 women who led to the charges, will they end up testifying?
No, it's like, how many times can these women relive this trauma, right?
It is traumatic to
Angela, I want to ask you, a lot of the blame is being put on the judge. How do you think this decision came about, and was the judge right?
Well, look, the majority was very strong in their language, but remember, there was a dissent, and also the lower appellate court affirmed what the trial court said. And the prosecutor, when they brought this information in, this witness testimony, it wasn't just to malign Weinstein. There was an intent there, and that was to show that it wasn't always consensual, that he had a pattern of non-consensual behavior. So in some ways, the prosecutors were right in that it was integral to the case. It's just it was also proven to be prejudicial. So I don't think we can say the trial judge just was definitively wrong across the board. Other judges obviously agreed with him, but here we are today.
But do you think this is something that the prosecutors should have known, and they should have gone down that route?
Oh, they absolutely knew this. I think they just didn't have a choice at that point, because there wasn't a lot of evidence to begin with. That's why they went down this road. They needed those witnesses, is what you're saying, to get the conviction. Sexual assault cases are really just he said, she said.
Sarah, you defended people who have faced similar allegations to Harvey Weinstein. What do you make of this decision today?
Yeah, to me, Tom, good to be with you. This is so much bigger than Harvey Weinstein, and it's a just decision because pattern evidence is admissible, but character assassination is not. And I think we've thought about this Me Too movement as this sort of outside social movement, but in fact, it has, penetrated the walls of courtrooms across the country in very unconstitutional ways. And this is one example. I'm not here endorsing sexual assault. Harvey Weinstein might be a monster, but even monsters have a right to a fair trial, and he didn't get a fair trial. And, frankly, I think if we want this movement to prosper and to achieve the goals that it has, I think that we need to ensure that we're playing by the same evidentiary rules, not just this special evidentiary rule that applies to Me Too cases. I mean, we saw this similar thing happen in the Cosby case as well. So I think it's the right I think it's the right decision, and I expected it, frankly.
Sarah, I want to kind of park it here for a moment, right? Because first, I appreciate your honesty. You're a defense attorney, and like I said, you've had cases like this. But this is something you're saying is a major problem, sort of in the justice system right now in America. You've seen this before. It happens a lot.
It happens a lot, Tom, because suddenly when a he said, she said, like your analyst said, sexual assault case comes before the court, before a judge, it's suddenly like, ooh, we got to treat this differently. A different set of rules apply. We break the rules. We bend the rules. And these are people's lives we're talking about. I'm saying this as an American, not just a defense attorney. And I can't tell you how many times I've had to write checks, for my clients. Many of them are high profile. I'm in LA, obviously. To not be Weinsteinized like this, because I know where we're headed. And I know that if we go to trial, there's a tremendous risk of this sort of copious amount of bad act witnesses walking in and getting their day in court to the detriment of the constitutional rights of my clients. So unfortunately, it is very common. And I think the decision today brings some balance. One of the accusers was talking about balance. I think that we need to bring some balance to this movement to achieve its goal. Otherwise, we definitely muzzle more women.
Kate, I do want to ask you, people are going to be watching this and they may be confused. They may wonder, is Harvey Weinstein going to be let out of prison now?
Right.
What's the answer?
Very good question, and we've been asking that all day. I was in touch with one of Weinstein's representatives about an hour ago. Short answer is not right now. He, right at this moment, is in upstate New York at a prison. They expect that he's going to be transferred closer to New York City just so he can associate with his lawyers more easily as this works through the New York system, because the Manhattan District Attorney has said they're going to do everything in their power to retry the case, which is an interesting way to say it. Everything in their power doesn't mean they will. They're looking at trying to retry the case. Meantime, you mentioned in California, he faces 16 years in prison out there. They are appealing, his attorneys in California, telling us today that they think this New York decision is really going to impact their appeal in Los Angeles. They would like to see Harvey Weinstein be let out on, house arrest or wear an ankle monitor. We're not at that point yet, but that's what they would like to see.
Angela, I'm going to get to you in a second because I do want to go back to Sarah since you're in California and you're dealing with this. You just heard what Kate reported. They're going to go after this. They're going to try to get this case overturned in California. Do they have a case in California?
I mean, that case is on appeal. There's different grounds in California based on his trial. But I think what's going to happen is if this case is tried back again in New York, all of the evidence that came out in the L.A. case can be, it's fair game. And so that evidence can be used against him. So even though the Manhattan DA is saying, if they can go after him or they might go after him because now they're not going to have these bad act witnesses the second time around, the benefit that they do have is the evidence that came out in the California case. And to the extent that that's relevant, that could come in against him in New York in trial number 2. But yeah, I mean, I think the appeal in L.A. is going to pull whatever it can from this decision as well. Different jurisdictions, though, different laws.
Angela, it's interesting. Me Too changed a lot of the ways these cases were prosecuted, as Sarah pointed out. And Kate, to be fair, also in journalism, it changed the way we covered these stories as well. You could argue the women that accused former President Bill Clinton did not get the same sort of opportunities or given their stories as much credence as people that came after them did. But I do want to ask you, I mean, what's the right solution, Angela, right? Because if these women were attacked, they were abused, they should be heard, especially if it could help convict somebody who's a very bad person.
Right, but look, I mean, as Sarah said, our criminal justice system is meant to balance the scales in the name of justice, in the name of the defendant's right if there's not enough evidence. So I do believe this is the right decision today, but I think it underscores how difficult sex assault cases are overall to prove, which means that if you ever are a victim, it is imperative that you document, you go to someone, you get treatment immediately. There has to be other evidence introduced into these cases because prosecutors have an impossible time trying to prove them in a he said, she said environment.
Kate, as we said, this is one of the first cases that started the Me Too movement, and so many men in very high, powerful positions were taken down because of their bad behavior. What do you think happens now? I mean, I would argue, I think the Me Too legacy stands, even though today may not be is obviously a terrible day for a lot of those victims. But I think it still stands.
The women that I talked to today were very clear that this is not the end, that this is a journey that they continue, that they will still keep fighting for those who are victims of sexual assault or harassment. And they don't see this as the end of Me Too. They see this as just a continuation of the fight.
All right, Kate Snow, we appreciate you. Angela and Sarah, I know you guys are standing by. Our other major headline tonight, the major courtroom revelations today in former President Trump's hush money trial here in New York. David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Enquirer, detailing that catch-and-kill scheme to conceal harmful stories about Trump and other politicians, including former California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. Vaughn Hilliard breaks down the biggest moments from that testimony.
On his third day on the stand, former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker told the jury he refused to catch and kill Stormy Daniels' story about her relationship with then-candidate Donald Trump. Pecker said he told his right-hand man at the Enquirer not to pay Daniels the $120,000 she was seeking because they'd already shelled out tens of thousands of dollars to keep other stories about Mr. Trump quiet. If anyone should buy it, Pecker said, it should be Donald Trump and Michael Cohen, Trump's former fixer. Pecker says when he told Cohen, quote, he was upset and responded that the boss, referring to Trump, would be furious with me. Pecker said today he believed Mr. Trump or his company had paid Daniels until Cohen told him in December of 2016 that he was the one who paid her. Prosecutors are seeking to prove Mr. Trump doctored internal business records to cover up that payment. Pecker also testified Trump was aghast when he saw Stormy Daniels on 60 Minutes.
Was it hush money to stay silent?
Yes. Pecker says Trump called him. He said, we have an agreement with Stormy Daniels that she cannot mention my name. Trump later denied knowledge of the arrangement. On cross-examination, Mr. Trump's lawyers challenging Pecker's credibility and business practices. At a campaign event earlier in the day, Mr. Trump addressed the testimony of his longtime friend.
David's been very nice. He's a nice guy.
Did you know about the payment to Stormy Daniels before the 2020 election? Pecker also testifying today about a payment his company did make to former Playboy model Karen McDougal to keep her alleged affair with Mr. Trump quiet. Pecker said he coordinated with Cohen, because he was concerned paying McDougal could violate campaign finance law. So they worked up an agreement to pay for her contributions to magazines owned by American media, adding he believed Trump was aware of the payment. The prosecution asking Pecker, was your principal purpose to suppress her story so as not to influence the election? Pecker responding, yes, it was.
Vaughn Hilliard joins us outside that courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Vaughn, it was quite the day there. We learned a little bit about Trump's defense team's strategy, right, with Pecker. They're trying to say this was a mutually beneficial relationship. Trump was good for business, and that this wasn't the first time Pecker actually did a deal with politicians, and that it was never investigated by the FEC.
Right. Look, he made the case in his questioning, Donald Trump's attorney, of David Pecker. Was this unique to Donald Trump just when he became a politician upon announcing his presidential bid in 2015? And the answer was no. Instead, Pecker testified that this kind of relationship, squashed the negative stories in exchange for good behind-the-scenes stories, began in the late 90s. Just for example, when Donald Trump was helming the Celebrity Apprentice, that he'd feed David Pecker behind-the-scenes info in exchange for him helping out by getting rid of bad stories, but also noting that he wasn't the only celebrity, mentioning the likes of Tiger Woods and even Arnold Schwarzenegger, when Arnold Schwarzenegger was announcing his run for governor of California back in the early 2000s. Again, this is part of the defense team's efforts to, cast Donald Trump as not a unique individual when it came to this sort of relationship with the National Enquirer empire.
All right, Vaughn Hilliard in Lower Manhattan for us. Vaughn, we thank you for that. For more on today's testimony in Trump's hush money case, I want to bring back NBC News legal analyst Angela Senadella and criminal trial attorney Sarah Azari, who is also the author of the book Unprecedented, a simple guide to the crimes of the Trump campaign and presidency. We thank you again for standing by for us. Angela, I'm going to start with you. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a juror, but I have to think the most damning piece of testimony was when David Pecker said in his conversations with Trump about these hush money payments, it was always about him, his campaign. He never brought up his family.
Yeah, that is certainly bad for Trump, given that it goes to showing intent. And as we've talked about before, it is just a misdemeanor to falsify business records, but with intent to defraud, it gets kicked up to a felony. But I actually think the bigger problem here is, what is that additional crime? We haven't really heard that from the prosecution yet. All we've heard is it's just general election fraud. But that's not enough. Everyone wants to influence their own election.
Yeah, that's not what this case is about. It's a good reminder to our viewers, right? It's about business fraud.
Well, it's about business fraud, but also to interfere in an election. That's what they're claiming is that bigger crime.
Yeah, Sarah, I want to ask you, David Pecker is now going under cross-examination. It started a little bit tonight. It'll continue tomorrow. We've started to see what the Trump team's line of questioning is going to be, right? That basically Trump was good for their business, for the National Enquirer as well. Will that be able to sway the jury that basically everyone was in on this? It wasn't just Trump?
Well, yeah, Pecker clearly was a co-conspirator, and he got the sweet deal of it was a gift of non-prosecution. So I think as the defense counsel, I would really attack. I expect that the defense team will attack Pecker's credibility and be like, wait a second. So, sir, you were in on the scheme. You were in the room where it was planned. You were using the Signal app to communicate it because you thought you were doing something illicit. You and others were in contact with Cohen trying to protect Trump and figure out the best way for it not to get discovered. You cooked your own books. I mean, you did all these things that show and consciousness of guilt, knowing that you're doing something wrong, and you got a non-prosecution. You're dirty. You're lying. You're a liar. That's where the defense is going to go with this. The problem, Tom, is that he's 1 out of 41. We've got Hope Hicks. We've got Stormy, McDougal, so many other people, heaps of evidence, documents, tapes, transcripts that don't lie. And so he can easily be rehabilitated by the prosecution, and they can show that even if you don't believe him, look at the other evidence. I mean, I think it's about the totality here.
Walk us through the strategy, though, to basically pinpoint that Pecker refused to buy the Stormy Daniels story. He said, I'm not going to buy it. Walmart is one of our biggest customers. They don't like porn star stories. And he refused to buy it, so that's why Michael Cohen essentially had to pay the money. What is that going to help the jury understand?
I think that's very relevant because it lays out the entire context of falsifying any business record. So what was written as legal services, he is showing absolutely was not. And he's also really graphically illustrating this entire sordid industry and alleging that Trump and Cohen were all a part of this. And that's where Sarah says he becomes a co-conspirator.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is awful for Trump.
You know, Sarah, so many people have lied throughout this affair, and it's been going on for a long time, since 2016, even further back if you think about when the alleged affair happened. I want to put up something on the screen for you. This is what David Pecker told the Wall Street Journal when they first asked him about Karen McDougal. And here's the quote that he has there. And here's what it says. It says, and I'm sorry here, just the notes. It says, in a written statement, the company said it wasn't buying a Miss McDougal's story for $150,000, but rather 2 years' worth of her fitness columns and magazine covers, as well as executive life rights to any relationship she has had with then-married man. AMI has not paid people to kill damaging stories about Mr. Trump, the statement said. But today, Pecker said that's exactly what they did. And asked why he authorized this false statement, here's what he said. We'll put it back up on the screen for you. I want to protect my company. I wanted to protect myself, and I wanted to protect Donald Trump. So, Sarah, he's admitting that he is a liar and that he will lie on the record. And he's on the stand right now. He's under oath. But why should the jury believe him?
Well, yeah, interestingly, Tom, I mean, you can argue liars are always liars, but you were lying then, but you're not lying now is an effective argument that happens to work often, and it has in my career. I think you rehabilitate the witness, and the big difference, number one, is that you were lying to a journalist or to a news outlet. Now you're under oath, and I think jurors can appreciate the importance of being in court before a judge and a jury and taking an oath to tell the truth. But more importantly, there's corroboration. That's the most important thing we have here, is that even if you don't believe Mr. Pecker, you've got all these other people that tell you the same story. And when you connect the dots, it turns out that Mr. Pecker is telling you the truth today. So again, I think you look at the totality and you can, I think the jury will get past that.
Angela, hasn't Pecker opened himself to lawsuits here? Because he just spilled the beans about Arnold Schwarzenegger. He also admitted he completely lied about Ted Cruz, and he actually did that with malice. It was to help Donald Trump. So could he be sued here?
Yes, absolutely. You would make a great lawyer, because that is literally the definition of defamation. So he opened himself up to lawsuits. But look, his testimony here was not necessarily voluntary. He likely did it because he had to in order to escape prosecution himself. So if you ask anyone, would you prefer a barrage of civil lawsuits or criminal prosecution and end up behind bars? They would likely choose opening themselves up to civil lawsuits.
You know, Sarah, the other thing we learned is that Cohen had sort of this weird relationship with David Pecker at the National Enquirer, so much so that he was begging him to buy the Stormy Daniels story, right? Begging him. Pecker refused. And then after, Cohen asked Pecker to help him get his bonus from Trump. Right? Do you think that's going to sort of cloud the view of both Cohen and Pecker, and that Cohen essentially was just doing something on his own to gain favor with Donald Trump?
Yeah, I mean, I think Pecker, look, I think the defense can argue these two men should not be believed. They acted in ways that was after their own interest. They lied, and they were part of this conspiracy, and so they're biased. You don't need to believe them. But, you know, it's interesting that Cohen, obviously as Trump's fixer, wanted Pecker to make the payment, so he doesn't have to be in that position. And then he was nudging Pecker to go after Trump to make sure that Cohen's reimbursed, because, you know, Trump doesn't pay his bills or doesn't pay people back. I think definitely the defense could also argue that Cohen went rogue. But I mean, at the end of the day, again, we have so many witnesses and other testimony and evidence that it's all a wash when it comes to these men's credibility.
We are just getting started. Sarah Zari, we appreciate that. Angela Senadella, always a pleasure to have you both on the show. Trump's legal team also before the Supreme Court today arguing the former president should be immune from prosecution in his D.C. election interference case. Trump's team saying without immunity, the presidency as we know it would be gone. But some justices in court today appearing skeptical of that argument. Laura Jarrett outside the Supreme Court tonight for us.
Tonight, the U.S. Supreme Court weighing a monumental question that will decide whether the former president goes to trial for plotting to overturn the last election and when.
I think that the Supreme Court has a very important argument before it today.
Mr. Trump hoping to persuade the justices to find him immune from federal charges. His lawyers arguing the office of the presidency would be completely hobbled without that protection.
Without presidential immunity from criminal prosecution, there can be no presidency as we know it.
The special counsel's office indicted Mr. Trump on conspiracy and obstruction charges last year for his efforts to cling to power, accusing the likely GOP nominee of pressuring state officials to reverse the election results. Actions DOJ argues were for purely personal gain and cannot be shielded from prosecution.
There is no immunity that is in the Constitution unless this court creates it today.
The conservatives expressing concern if future presidents have no immunity for actions taken while in the White House. That could open the door to recriminations between political rivals.
Will that not lead us into a cycle that destabilizes the functioning of our country as a democracy?
The liberal justices troubled by the prospect of insulating presidents from accountability, raising a series of dark hypotheticals to underscore the consequences of adopting Mr. Trump's position.
If a president sells nuclear secrets to a foreign adversary, is that immune? How about if a president orders the military to stage a coup? That sure sounds bad, doesn't it?
I'm trying to understand what the disincentive is from turning the Oval Office into, the seat of criminal activity in this country.
The fallout over efforts to subvert the election results in 2020 stretching beyond Washington. In Arizona, a grand jury indicted several members of Mr. Trump's inner circle Wednesday, accusing them of falsely awarding the state's electoral votes to Mr. Trump, despite his loss to President Biden. The sending of phony slates of pro-Trump electors to Congress to disrupt the election certification on January 6th, looming large at the high court today as well, as the justices look to determine the line between a political candidate's actions taken for personal gain from a president's official conduct that could be immune from prosecution.
All right, Laura joins us tonight from outside the Supreme Court in Washington. Laura, I know you have all the audio clips from the Supreme Court arguments at the top of your Spotify playlist, and we always ask you this. We know there's no decision yet, but from listening all day in court, do we know where the justices, especially the conservatives, which way they're leaning?
You know, Tom, based on just the questioning today, the impression I get is that this court is not going to say that the former president is completely immune from all prosecution. But what it does seem likely that they could do is decide he enjoys some limited immunity for some specific acts. But the lower court didn't decide that. And so it may be the case that they send it back down to Judge Kutkin to make that type of determination. But, Tom, of course, strategically, that works to his advantage, because what it means is that this trial will not happen before November, Tom.
Laura Jarrett handling this important case and those hecklers outside the Supreme Court. Laura, we thank you for that. Still ahead tonight, 2 Ohio police officers on paid leave. Newly released body cam footage showing an officer pinning a man under his knee. The man heard saying, "I can't breathe." He later died at the hospital. The investigation now underway. Plus, police and protesters clashing at Emory University as pro-Palestinian demonstrations appear at more college campuses. The shocking move by USC less than 2 weeks before graduation as tensions reach a boiling point. And the high school staff member arrested. The allegations he used AI to create fake and offensive audio that sounded just like the school's principal. We're going to walk you through this one. Stay with us. We're back now with the growing unrest on college campuses over the Israel-Hamas war. Protests popping at more universities today and police clashing with student demonstrators in Atlanta. The rising tension now causing USC to make a drastic last-minute change to graduation. NBC's Liz Kreutz in Los Angeles for the details.
In an unprecedented move, the University of Southern California tonight canceling this year's main commencement ceremony, attended by roughly 65,000 people, citing new safety measures put in place amid protests on campus. The stunning decision coming a day after nearly 100 protesters were arrested for trespassing after a contentious rally where pro-Palestinian demonstrators clashed with police.
Even if they have to cancel every single commencement, that's up to them.
The school's administration had already canceled the graduation speech for their pro-Palestinian valedictorian Asna Tabassum, citing safety concerns. Coast to coast, growing protests on more college campuses over the Israel-Hamas war, from George Washington University to Northeastern to Emory and Atlanta, where police in riot gear today clashed with demonstrators.
I go to this school!
Law enforcement appearing to use zip ties to restrain the protesters, even tasing one person. At Columbia, the epicenter of the protests, those camping out given a deadline to disperse by 4 a.m. If not, the university says we will have to consider alternative options for clearing the area.
And these protests are now spreading here in California as well. Here at UCLA, students have begun gathering, pitching tents in the heart of campus. Many of these students calling on the university to divest from Israel.
Tonight, these rising tensions igniting a debate about free speech versus hate speech on college campuses. At USC, Professor Brittany Friedman criticizing the university for escalating what she says have been peaceful protests.
You believe these students' First Amendment rights are being violated?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They are criticizing a nation state for their actions in war, not criticizing a faith that is very close to me.
But some Jewish students say they feel the demonstrations have crossed a line.
I don't believe that, advocating for the rights of the Palestinian people are inherently anti-Semitic. But some of these chants and some of the ways in which that they attribute and target Jewish students, that is anti-Semitic.
And Tom, here at UCLA, this protest continues to grow. There's now several hundred students camped out here. They put this makeshift barrier up, allowing only demonstrators inside. They say they plan to stay here until the university meets their demands. Now, as for USC, we've heard from so many disappointed students tonight. The university says they made this decision because they feel it would just take too long to process all the thousands of guests given these new security measures. Tom?
Liz Kreutz with that new news out of California. Liz, we thank you for that. Now to a wild story of alleged revenge at a Baltimore high school. The athletic director arrested and accused of framing the principal by creating audio with AI that included offensive comments about Black and Jewish students. The principal telling police that employees had been under investigation for misconduct. NBC's Julia Jester has more on the investigation.
Tonight, high school athletic director under arrest for allegedly framing a Baltimore principal with AI-generated audio.
I'm the principal here, me and only me.
Dazon Darian charged with disrupting school activities after investigators say he manipulated Pikesville High School principal Eric Eiswert's voice and spread offensive audio on social media in January. The audio, which sparked widespread outrage, included disparaging remarks about Black and Jewish students and parents, and even mentioned Darian by his nickname.
And don't let me get started on DJ. I'm going to drag his black out of here one way or another.
Take a listen to how similar Eiswert's actual voice.
As student athletes, you have won county, region, and state championships with grace and humility.
Is to the one suspected to be AI generated.
How hard is it to get these students to meet their grade level expectations?
Eiswert denied ever making the comments, and police now confirm the audio was fake.
Some of the telltale things that we saw were the fact there's a bit of a monotone. There's not so much changing in pitch toward the end of sentences.
Charging documents allege the recording contained traces of AI-generated content with human editing after the fact, which added background noises for realism.
Through their investigation, detectives allege Mr. Darian made the recording to retaliate against the principal who had launched an investigation into the potential mishandling of school funds.
Police say the incriminating audio spread online after Darian anonymously emailed it to 2 other teachers. Darian waived his right to an attorney and is being held on bond. He did not respond to NBC's request for comment. Eiswert did not want to comment on ongoing criminal proceedings.
As we continue to embrace emerging technology and its potential for innovation and social good, we must also remain vigilant against those who would abuse it for malicious intent.
Officials say the recording's release had profound repercussions, caused significant disruptions for students and staff, and put Eiswert and his family at significant risk of harm from others. A cautionary tale for both the perpetrators of AI manipulation and the public.
I think what's interesting about this clip is that the person doing it may have been a bit rushed. If this person did a little bit better job, it would have been impossible for anyone's naked ears to tell the difference.
And with that, Julia Jester joins us now live from Washington. So, Julia, this AD was charged with disrupting school activities, but he wasn't charged for any of the AI stuff. Is that correct?
Well, Tom, the short answer is that is correct. Right now, it is only illegal to impersonate government and business entities, but the FTC recently proposed expanding that rule to make all AI impersonation illegal.
And local officials who noted Darian's charge only carries a maximum 6-month sentence are now pushing to update laws to keep up with evolving technology that could cause harm. Tom?
Yeah, those laws couldn't come fast enough. What's the status of that AD, and does that fake audio, does it still live online?
Well, it's unclear whether Principal Eiswert will return to the job. Today, the superintendent said she's exploring administrative changes and will work with him concerning next year. According to a school board document, Darian submitted his resignation last month, effective at the end of June. School officials said they're taking appropriate actions, which could include early termination. He's due in court in June. And in the meantime, yes, Tom, the audio can still be found online, really underscoring how it's hard to put AI content back into the box once it's opened.
Yeah, it's terrible it's still out there. Okay, Julia Jester, great story tonight. We appreciate it. When we come back, the massive fire in California. Live pictures showing the blaze engulfing the Oceanside Pier. Crews trying to fight this fire from the sea and the air. We'll have the late-breaking details next. All right, we're back now with Top Stories Newsfeed. An investigation underway in Ohio after a man died following an encounter with police. A warning, this video is very hard to watch. Body cam footage showing police in Canton struggling to arrest Frank Tyson when one of the officers places his knee on Tyson's back to restrain him. Tyson is heard saying, "I can't breathe." Tyson then lying motionless for 5 minutes before police check his pulse. He was later pronounced dead at the hospital. Police say he was suspected of fleeing the scene of a car crash. No word yet if alcohol or drugs were in his system at the time. 2 of the police officers involved are on paid leave. A massive fire breaking out late today in Oceanside, California. Aerial footage shows the Oceanside Pier, look at this, engulfed in thick smoke with a fire ripping through a building at the end of the pier. The smoke filling the sky, a helicopter making a water drop on the fire, and 2 firefighting boats are on the scene with water cannons. The pier is closed. No word on any injuries or the stability of that structure. And the Federal Trade Commission issuing more than $5.6 million in refunds to the customers of the security camera company Ring. According to the settlement, the Amazon-owned company trained algorithms using customer videos without consent and failed to protect against hackers. The FTC says impacted customers will receive a PayPal payment notification, which they will need to redeem within 30 days. Okay, now to the Americas, where in Mexico, experts are warning that major cities could soon be running out of water. Extreme weather and dry conditions making matters worse. Our partners at Telemundo traveled to Mexico, where they found entire towns that have little to no access to drinking water. Some pointing to large companies who they say are taking the little water that is left. Telemundo anchor Vanessa Oak has the story.
In the middle of the Zumpango Lagoon, just outside of Mexico City, it's impossible to escape the scorching heat.
Era un lugar turístico, venían muchas personas, muchas familias, aquí convivían.
Once a tourist destination, for years, Conchita and her family will visit the temple of Mother Guadalupe in the middle of the lagoon.
La única manera de accesar era por lancha. Era la única manera de llegar aquí.
After 2 years of severe drought across Mexico, the landscape here has completely changed. Everything is dry. Not a trace of water. A desert. It's all that's left. 2023 was the driest year in Mexico since 1941.
No vamos a tener buena cosecha.
Currently, about 70% of all of Mexico is in drought. According to Conagua, the entity that regulates water in Mexico, more than 60 million people, half of the entire country's population, without daily access to water.
I think we are in a moment in time when it could be really bad if we don't start putting up strategies for a better way of managing water. So if we continue the way we're until today, it will be very critical, and we can arrive to the moment in which we have no more water. Arreglar las fugas de agua.
Experts now joining a growing call, warning that Mexico City could be just months away from running out of water. So we went directly to the president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, and asked if he had a strategy to combat the ongoing water crisis.
No tenemos problemas de agua.
Instead, he insisted that there wasn't a water shortage in Mexico. So we asked him specifically about this region in the south of Mexico, where thousands say they have no access to water.
Ayer estuvimos en Chiapas, donde hay una población muy vulnerable y la mayoría de las personas no tienen acceso a agua.
Chiapas es de los estados con más agua.
Con más agua, pero no significa que les llegue a las viviendas de las personas.
Es donde más llega agua.
This is San Cristobal de las Casas, located in the state of Chiapas, where you can find about 30% of the country's water supply. Yet, according to the water plant, 700,000 residents have no direct access to water.
Los garrafones están vacíos porque no hay de dónde llenar.
Some pointing to factories like this one, a Coca-Cola plant that has been given permission to extract water for almost 3 decades, where over 1 million liters of water are collected on a daily basis.
Many families drink Coca-Cola several times, not during the week, but during the day.
Dr. Arana has been studying the effects of diabetes in Chiapas. He says the water scarcity has led families in the community to resort to sugary drinks. In fact, the state of Chiapas has been considered the place that consumes the most Coca-Cola in the world.
We found that many babies that are less than 6 months, younger than 6 months of age, are given Coca-Cola in bottles. So this is a very bad start of life.
In 2020, the town's city councils approached the National Water Commission to revoke all concessions that were given to Coca-Cola, but their petitions were denied. After we reached out to Coca-Cola for an interview, they sent us this statement saying, "We recognize the water access challenges in San Cristobal, and for nearly a decade we have been working with local communities to help improve water access. We always abide by local laws and regulations. We also agree that too much sugar isn't good for anyone. In Mexico, over 45% of our broad portfolio of products are low or no sugar." Meanwhile, in Zumpango, the community gets together praying for rain.
Vanessa Oak joins us tonight from Miami at our Telemundo Center. Vanessa, we've been covering the upcoming presidential election in Mexico in just over a month. How big of an issue will the water shortage be for the presidential hopefuls who are campaigning now?
It will be very important. In the middle of the worst drought in recent decades, the lack of water will definitely be a central issue for the candidates competing to succeed Andrés Manuel López Obrador. For the first time in history, it will be a women president. The first contender is Claudia Sheinbaum, who leads the polls. She proposes a 30-year plan to achieve sustainable water use in Mexico. She is an environmental scientist and a co-author of the 2007 Nobel Prize-winning IPCC report. Her primary contender is Xochitl Gálvez, who proposes to expand the water distribution infrastructure, to build secondary networks, and to repair water leaks. Water will be key in the next elections. Many citizens are really angry. Hundreds of people have taken to the streets of Mexico to protest the water crisis. And just for you to understand how important this is for them, according to the Mexican Constitution, access to water is a human right in Mexico.
As it should be, and those candidates are going to have some answers and or some plans. All right, Vanessa, we thank you so much for joining Top Story tonight. Coming up right after this break, we're going to take you to Venice, Italy, where there are protests over something they want to do to tourists. Would you pay around $5 just to set foot in an open public space that used to be free for centuries? We'll tell you what those fights are all about. Stay with us. All right, we're back now with the big change to a major tourist destination. The historic city of Venice will now charge about $5 to anyone visiting for just the day. The fee just for entrance into the city, not anything else. Officials say it's to help with over-tourism, but some residents aren't buying that. NBC's Claudio Lavagna is in Venice tonight with a look at how all of this is working.
Imagine being charged $5 just to walk down the iconic streets of New York City.
I don't think it's a good thing. I mean, it's a public space, so you shouldn't be charging for it.
I sure would, but I don't think a lot of people would pay for it.
Would you pay $5 to go to Times Square? Definitely not. No.
Well, that's now the reality in Venice. The Italian city is sometimes called an open-air museum, and starting Thursday, some tourists will have to pay an entry ticket as if it was one. From now on, day trippers will be charged €5, or the equivalent of about $5 to simply enter the city. Among them are these tourists who arrived in Venice by train. Instead of being met by gondoliers, they were stopped by ticket inspectors asking for a QR code. The proof they registered on a dedicated website.
I come here as often as I can. I'll be back next year. I was here last year with my grandchildren, and I'll pay it every time. Venice is worth it.
The fee only applies to visitors who did not book accommodation and on selected holidays and weekends. The aim, reduce overcrowding on busy days.
We are not looking to collect money, to tax people, or to introduce a police state into Venice. So we are very democratic about it. It's been very important, the message. So please, if you are a day tripper, choose another day.
Venice has long had a problem with over-tourism. About 50,000 people visit the city every day on average. That's the same as the number of residents. But not all of them support the pilot scheme. Demonstrators against the new fee marching through Piazzale Roma on Thursday, saying while over-tourism is a problem, they do not think the new move will deter visitors.
I don't think this is going to work, as in my experience as a tour guide. Tourists I talk to say that it's not just a way to monetize. They're ready to pay €5 in their budget to visit Venice in a day.
Anyone under 14 does not have to pay, but still has to register. Residents, workers, and students are also exempt. Now, the local administration says that more than 100,000 people have registered so far to access Venice. Well, 10% of them were paying day visitors. The proof, the mayor says, that the scheme is working and it did not go dead in the water.
That does it for us on Top Story tonight. I'm Tom Llamas in New York. Stay right there. More news on the way.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.